All right, and on take number 3, I am Callie Sinclair, and I am here with Cailee Anello, and we're
Hi.
actually on our third conversation here in my podcast, Conversations with Kallie. And you can find us both on social media, and they're also in the show notes. My @ is Consciously Kallie, and she is the Ripened Heart on Instagram, and you can also find our websites if you'd like to dive a little deeper into our work, because today we are talking about a topic that I think is so pertinent to what is happening right now with kind of the great awakening that we're experiencing. And this conversation I've been really excited for weeks, because is the reason why really the podcast got started.
Yeah.
Because we always, when we have our phone conversations, just dive deep down the rabbit hole. And so today's conversation is about diving deep into the rabbit hole. And so I love our conversations because we are able to just go in there and we talk about so many different things that I'm really excited to touch on this conversation.
Yeah. And, we had talked about basically nothing is off limits today. So be forewarned. If it exists, we're probably going to go there in terms of the conspiracy realm. And, I think it's just so important to not be afraid to have these conversations because they're so important. And I really just want to destigmatize conspiracies and being called a conspiracy theorist, because really you're just a conscious observer, and it's a very healthy thing to question the narrative that's been put forth, to question your reality and never take anything as 100% fact that somebody else told you, especially if they have money and power to gain from it. So that's
Absolutely.
just my disclaimer. I think it's
I
so
love
important.
that. Yeah, I love that explanation and I love that's why I think I resonate so much with diving down the rabbit hole as the expression rather than going down like the conspiracy theorist
Yeah.
terminology, because diving down the rabbit hole comes from Alice in Wonderland, where you are just really coming into something that questions your reality. And so I love that explanation of just when you go into something and then you come out with a totally different viewpoint, and because you're not the same person that you were after you find this information out.
No, truly. And, when I started doing it back in the day, I was a little bit naive about it. I thought that people would be a lot more open to these kinds of conversations than they were. And it actually really surprised me, people's reactions to somebody who was questioning things. I was in college at the time, and I had professors who would get mad at me if I asked, the wrong kind of question about what they were teaching, because my background is in psychology and sociology, and I was super interested in natural health even in college. So I took a sociology class all about the healthcare system, and I thought naively that we were actually going to be having an open discussion about healthcare, health alternatives, and it turned out to be just like the biggest piece of propaganda I've ever encountered in my life. And so it was shocking to me because, we would have to write reflection essays and all these documentaries we'd watch in class. And if you had the wrong opinion on something, you'd get a big red X on your paper, and that the teacher would be like, oh, this is fake, like this has been debunked. It was supposed to be my reflection, how I viewed the information, but apparently there was only a certain type of reflection that you were supposed to do on things like vaccines, where if you brought up, alternative science that says actually there is no proof that these are safe,
Mm.
you get a big red X on your paper and you fail your reflection assignment. I didn't even know you could fail reflection, but I did. So
That's so much of what you're seeing now, like of just shoving away information that disagrees with the science,
yeah.
which
Yep.
is really, we are always constantly evolving and constantly finding new information and new science, that when you say don't question the science, it's
Yes.
almost like just a way, like, that's validating the fact that you don't have a better argument than what you gave.
Yes, and I think it's just it makes me so sad because people are really, really scared to question the settled science on things because you'll be called like any name in the book, and you'll be called like stupid, like, oh, about global warming or anything like that. And it's like, that you've done the research and that you have kept an open mind, but people don't want to hear it because they think that just because there's a consensus within the media that has to be the truth, when
Mhm.
we've seen time and time again that there's always going to be corruption within those systems. Since basically, we had civilization, there has been corruption in places of power because there's something about human nature. Once we start to have a hierarchy, people at the top of the food pyramid or the top of the food chain, they want power and they kind of become corrupt. I don't know what it is about
Like the
human nature.
Stanford prison experiment almost in
Oh
real
yeah,
life.
that's
So
so
if anybody hasn't heard of the Stanford prison experiment, I recommend looking it up. There's lots of movies and stuff about it as well now. But
yeah.
basically that, and I view that almost as sometimes when, like, the way people are now with being a Karen and things like that, is
Yeah.
that, like, I'm in this position of being like superior to this person. And so me putting that on other people, you just become like almost like this, like, power hungry.
Yeah.
It's a very weird dynamic to think about, like, when I've seen that from a psychological standpoint, because we watched it, I remember, in like psychology class, and
Yeah.
went diving deep into that. And so that's what it almost reminds me of in a way.
Yeah, and it's like similarly the Milgram experiment where I don't know if you saw that in psychology too, where they gave people the shock treatment that they thought that they were hearing somebody else's distress or scream, but it was actually just a recording. They weren't actually giving anybody any electric shock. But it was basically another like obedience experiment where if an authority figure tells you to deliver a shock to somebody, they would do it because somebody higher up told them to do it. And
Yeah.
so that's kind of where we are. And um, I don't know what it is about human nature that's like that, but I mean, we see it so much today where we think that the science is settled on any number of things, COVID being the perfect example, when there's all these doctors coming out and saying, wait a minute, the science isn't settled on this. And they get automatically suppressed, they get fired, they get their social media deleted. And it's a really scary time, where if you question, you are really like socially punished. It reminds me of like the what is that they have in China now, where basically you get like a social credit score, like they grade you based on like your interactions with people.
Oh
It's
my
like the
gosh, it's
Black
like
Mirror
Black Mirror.
episode.
Yes. Yes, it's like
Yeah,
a Black Mirror episode.
it's literally like that, where you get like a rating based on how you interact on social media, what you post, how you interact with the people around you, where it's like if you don't have a certain social credit score, you get privileges taken away from you, like travel. And it's insane, and that's basically what they're gearing us up for on social media when they shadow ban you.
Mhm.
They're telling you, no, this isn't how a good person behaves in society, so we're going to punish you for it. It's like they're getting us ready for something like that, and it's just getting worse and worse. And in me, I don't know what it is about me, but it just makes me want to speak out more and be like, wait a minute. Like,
Same.
there's something not right. And it's like you get this like positive expression of anger where you're like, no, I have to use my voice and say something about this because I'll regret it if I remain silent, because it's just so like amazingly corrupt and like messed up
Yeah.
that it's
That
just
even
quiet.
Right, like the censorship, the Facebook jail, the
Yeah.
you know, I just was put in like jail on Instagram where I couldn't like anything for over 24 hours.
That was insane.
And I have no idea why. They never tell you why. And they don't even, you only have one option, and that is either to press like, okay, basically you accept your fate, or you get to press the button that says, tell us why, just like, and it's just as more of a, probably a PR thing than anything, because it doesn't actually do anything. They know exactly what they are doing, and they are censoring anything that doesn't fit the narrative.
Yeah, and then they it's really creepy to me too, because the people who will speak out against it and who are for the censorship, it's like they all have the same script where they'll say the same thing. Like all of a sudden people will say, "Oh, well, they should be censored because they're dangerous." It's like, I don't know how many times I've seen people use the exact same phrase. "Oh, well, it's dangerous to question COVID. It's dangerous to question this. It's dangerous to question climate science because we're all going to die in 10 years." It's like, how arrogant have we gotten where we as humans think that we have that much control of the planet? I'm sorry. Like,
Yeah, no, definitely. Have you ever, it's like that news clip where you can see 100 screens at once of all of the same channels saying the exact same thing about fake news being a threat to
yes.
our democracy.
Yes. Oh my
Is
God.
it's absolutely sickening how much if you hear the same repeated message over and over and over again, you cannot help but believe it. That's why, like, when in school you were punished, you know, writing this
Oh my God.
saying, I will be obedient, or, you know, I won't talk in class, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
If you write it a certain number of times, it does ingrain in your brain. And so the same thing goes for media. If they keep pushing fear and fear and fear and fear, you are going to feel that, and it's going to have an
Mhm.
impact on you, whether you are aware of it or not.
Yeah, and it's, just to give some historical examples of what we're talking about, of people who have questioned things but were punished for it, but they ended up being right. The government used to say it was safe to spray your kids with DDT. The government said you should be able to smoke Camel cigarettes when you're pregnant. And the doctor's preferred choice is Camel cigarettes. Like, you know what I mean? Like, doctors were literally paid to promote toxic products. And ultimately, that was banned, and you're no longer able to do that. But there was a gap of time where that was socially accepted as it's safe. And so why would something like questioning corona, questioning masks, questioning um, vaccines be any different? GMOs, all of this stuff, history repeats itself. And that's one of the best things I've heard. It's Michael Tessarian, his podcast Unslaved. He talks about this a lot, where if you want to know the answers to the plight that you're currently facing, all you have to do is look to history, because history repeats itself. And there's a pattern that you can see where the government will say something safe, and later on they're like, oops, sorry, there's some sort of lawsuit that comes out against them. We're seeing that with Monsanto right now. Them saying glyphosate is safe, spray it all over your lawn, have your kid play soccer and roll around in it. It's totally fine. And then there's lawsuits coming out against them where it's actually like, oh, they were lying. This
Right.
happens so often, so it's like, why is it so frowned upon to question when history has repeated itself again and again that people lie and actually it wasn't safe, etc., or it was true, the conspiracy was true, or what have you.
Absolutely. Yeah, like you think back to, they spray DDT as a bug spray. Like, kids used to
Yeah.
like walk through
Oh my
DDT.
God, I remember that as a kid.
Yeah.
Like, they would have the I think it's like some sort of truck that will come across the neighborhood, and they'll like spray for mosquitoes every summer. Did you have that?
No, but I've seen so many like towns where they also used that, like or a similar chemical. There was one that they used on gravel roads specifically too, that was supposed to help with it being like not so dusty. And
Oh,
they
wow.
found the cancer rates increased by like 75% in the
Oops.
towns that they did it. Yeah, just oops. And then, of course, like at the time, people didn't question it. And that's the same thing with DDT. Like, if you and me were having that conversation back then, they would have been like, they wouldn't put it on the shelves if it wasn't safe for us.
Exactly.
And the same thing, you can look at our cleaning products nowadays are a fine example of that. When you look at the
Yes.
ingredients, a lot of them say toxic to animals, toxic, has carcinogenic properties, meaning that they're cancer causing and hormone disrupting. And so you can see that they really don't care that much about our health by what they put on the shelves. Even looking
No.
at tobacco, I just saw like a sign. I just was in the gas station and I saw the sign that said in huge letters, can cause gum disease and mouth cancer in huge letters. And I'm like, look at this, that is legal.
Yeah.
And not only legal, it's not frowned upon
Yeah.
whatsoever. But then we have all of these other things that are frowned upon that have no benefits, like psychedelics and things that have been studied, in many different countries to be beneficial. And then those are illegal. So that they don't really care about health when these are the things that are pushed.
Well, and then, people think, to go on the psychedelic topic for a minute, because I actually just had to vote on that in Oregon, because there's a move to legalize psilocybin. And the problem is that it's the same thing when they legalize the marijuana, is then the government gets a hold of it and they start planting GMO weed that's sprayed with pesticides, and then is going to be very damaging to your health and is not the same thing as what's grown in nature. That's really the push that I've seen so much. Is I think that especially if you live in the city, you get so divorced from the natural world that you have a hard time understanding why certain things are bad for you or toxic. Like, we're so absorbed in kind of this man-made concrete jungle that we tend to forget, that nature already has all the answers for us, and that you don't, if you need to spray the crap out of a crop with glyphosate, there's something wrong with your soil. Farmers knew this, regenerative farmers know this. It's not the answer to just, spray some sort of man-made chemical on something. There's something inherently wrong. And so I think that that's what I see a lot, is like things that mean well kind of become corrupted when the government gets involved.
That's
And
so
it's like,
true.
it's kind of terrifying, and it's like things that should be a good measure to pass. It's like, wait a minute, but who's going to be in control of this?
Absolutely. It's like reading the fine print on all of these legislation pieces that seem like they're good. And
Yes.
then of course it is, like that it's a control, or it's, like their own agenda that they'll like slide kind of in there as
Yes,
well. When
exactly.
in reality, it should be decriminalized
Yeah.
and just abundant for people to be able to grow their own and
Yeah.
to be able to like have their own, experience with it, rather than it being a government controlled substance.
Yeah, there's something wrong when it's still penalized for you to be able to grow it in your own backyard. It has to be like a government approved facility or a government regulated facility. I think that's terrifying.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing. And that's what's really hard about this, that I want to acknowledge, is that a lot of times, the media, ultimately, they're the ultimate experts on human psychology. And I think that that's important to remember, because they know exactly how to word things to get us to believe them, to get us to pay attention, for it to stick in our minds. It's kind of like advertising jingles that you still remember from your childhood. They know your psychology, they know how to get it to stick. And so that's why this is also confusing, is because they will take something that seems really virtuous and good, and like it'll move us forward as a society, but they'll twist it in some way. There's always a twist that you have to uncover with everything. And that's why it's to a point where I just question everything, no matter how virtuous and good it sounds, because I know there's always a plot twist that I have yet to discover as to why they're going to fuck us over in some way.
It's so true. I question everything too.
Yeah.
I'm like, this seems good, but is it?
Yes.
So I think that's an important thing. And that's what, like you said, we are doing a disservice by not questioning things at all times, including our own government, including,
Yes.
like what things are being passed, or, what is legal, looking at like just what, like the way that our world is run currently. It
Mhm.
is so important to question things and make a vision for how things could be, because
Yep.
I've seen probably the best quote of the way that I can, is like this quote was the best way that I can possibly put it. And that is that our system is inherently meant to fail. The way
Yep.
that it is built and the way that this system is currently is that it is going to fail. So now it's not just a matter of like us, breaking that down, but also us envisioning for this new world as well, because it is going to fail. So now it's a matter of what do we want that to look like? Let's take a look at our history and learn from it so that we don't repeat these same mistakes.
Yeah, and I think that we're having the conversation at the perfect time because I think we mentioned this in the other podcast where we are literally at the perfect astrological time for our whole system, or this whole corrupt system, to be obliterated.
Yes.
So we have to have these uncomfortable conversations. And like, you can totally disagree with everything we're saying, but we have to have these conversations. We can't just stick to the narrative, and what we're being told, because that is how we'll never be able to create something that is going to be a healthy, prosperous society that we can live in, that is free and that is, you know, actually good for humanity and not just this corrupt nightmare.
Yeah, where like there's a few that are literally running things for the other 99% of us who really
Yeah.
just all want the same thing: life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, to
Mhm.
have a family, to live a life that we're doing something that we're passionate about. Like when you look at people, we are inherently good, and
Yeah.
yet we have all of these, deep, dark things that have been happening throughout our history, all over this power that we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. And this just popped into my head. I remember talking to my dad when COVID started. And he was like, this kind of reminds me of the H1N1 situation. And I remember that, because I think I might have been in middle school when that happened. I don't remember what year that was. But the point is he was like, what's the big difference between H1N1 and coronavirus? And he said, social media. Back when H1N1 was a thing, there was no social media where you had constant updates, where the media could totally inundate you with fear 24/7, and where people could get into Facebook battles and Instagram and everything like that. It's like we've never lived through something traumatic like this as a society, with constant updates to further propagate fear. And of course they had the news, they could turn on the news, but you can only watch the news for so long. But there's something about the smartphone that's so addictive that you can't stop looking at it. And that's something I was just talking to Em this morning, my girlfriend, and I was saying there, we're saying that there's something so much different about a smartphone, even versus a laptop, in the way that it's used and in the addictive factor of it. As soon as we got like social media onto our smartphones, it's so hard to put it down, and it takes up so much of your time and space and life force energy, where it's like it's actually insane. And I think that that's why, part of why we're seeing such a difference today and like how this is pushed.
Yeah, definitely. That just reminded me of, just like what you said with, the media being experts about getting us to get that little dopamine hit, or to, keep us intrigued.
Mm.
They send us notifications when they know that we haven't been on social media in a little bit, just so our phone
Yep.
lights up so that we will look at it. And these same people are on these social media apps. And when you look at now who actually works at these social media app companies, it's a lot of actually people that were ex-politicians or ex-military and
Yes.
all of these extremely like high up positions. It's like, what are they doing in
And they don't
these
allow their kids to
social
be
media
on it.
companies? And they don't what? Sorry.
They don't allow their kids to be on it.
Yes, exactly.
Like Bill Gates, this isn't 100% fact checked, but I've seen over and over, he hasn't allowed his kids to be vaccinated.
Yep, I've seen that over and over as well.
It's like, okay, you know, the gig's up, you know, there's something when their kids to be a part of it. It's like, okay, what are they doing? And why aren't we allowed to talk about it or question it?
Yep, it's the same thing with, if you can find me a picture, a valid picture of Bill Gates wearing a mask, I will pay you $100.
I saw that meme. I just saw
You can't
that.
find one. You can't.
Wow. That's insane.
Yeah,
That's
one of the people that is pushing the masks the most, and you cannot find a picture of him wearing one. He uses kind of Dr. Fauci, I think, as a front man.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And, you know, it's like, I listened to a podcast where it broke down exactly how profitable a COVID vaccine would be. And it's basically, if you like spent like millions of dollars a day for the rest of your life, it would take them like since the time of Jesus to spend the money. Like
I'm not
it's
even
actually
surprised.
billions. You know, when you hear billions of dollars, I feel like we're kind of desensitized to the number. But when you break it down, actually how much money that is, it you realize that it's so much more than money. It's absolute power. And I think that that's something that's really scary that we're headed toward. Is in that same conversation with my dad, I was like, I wouldn't be surprised if, you know, if there even is a next presidential election, that it'll be somebody like Jeff Bezos from Amazon or Mark Zuckerberg or Bill Gates on the ballot, because it turns out that slowly but surely they actually have more power than the government.
Yeah,
That's how much money they have.
I've
So
had
we
that conversation.
because they'll be our rulers someday if we don't.
Yes, exactly. And I have had that conversation so many times about if Jeff Bezos decided to end world hunger today, he could absolutely end it over and over again. That's the thing with that, having that much money and that much power, is that they get to choose what our world looks like. So why is it that, you know, we have been for decades and decades looking for the cure for cancer, but yet somehow
Yes.
never gotten one? Or, you know, there's all this money supposedly poured into these things, and yet you can't tell me with billions of dollars that you haven't found something yet.
Exactly. And, you know, I'm sure you've seen that even with doTERRA. Have you? Where it's like all of a sudden it's like this ingredient is no longer going to be legal to use in like a supplement or in an essential oil or something like that, because they found a way to patent it as like a medication. I think they're even doing that, you know, with just CoQ10, like things like that. It's absolutely insane. And it's like, you know, I've heard supplement companies that have integrity, they're like, because they're constantly trying to buy you out. They're constantly trying to destroy it in any way possible, because they know how powerful natural medicine is in things like cancer and in incurable diseases.
Yeah, that's one of the gateways that really got me started looking into more, especially conspiracies, or not even, again, they're not conspiracies, especially when they are being deemed true, but just the, I guess, conspiracy theories, I should say. It is a conspiracy in a way, because people are conspiring, obviously, against our health in so many ways, when things like chemotherapy and radiation, which is basically like dumping toxins into our body, you know, like saying like, hey, your body's toxic, let me dump more into them, because even pharmacists cannot have like the air blowing near them, and they have to wear these like hazmat suits when they work with chemotherapy and radiation, and yet that is going into someone's body. But yet we cannot have high dosage vitamin C. It is illegal in the United States. And in fact, there was just a bunch of
Yeah.
videos taken down off YouTube about vitamin C.
Vitamin C, like of all things.
Out of all things, like so dangerous.
I know, it's insane. It's insane. And it's just like, it's just, gosh, it just blows my mind. And I just, it's so important to just be aware of these things. It's like, why are they trying so hard to suppress the information? That's always what I get back to. And, people who have been for the lockdowns and for all these COVID restrictions, the reason that I'm not for them is because I know better than to think that the government actually cares about my health because of these things. If you're in the natural medicine world, if you know the kind of corruption that goes on with big pharma, you know for a fact the government doesn't care about your health. And so that's why, it's been really sad for me to see that there's kind of a divide in even the spiritual community about like whether or not to question COVID. It's like, how can you not when you know that this is not about health? It never is about health. It's always about power. And now on Time Magazine, they just had the new feature is the Great Reset, as if they had all planned it, of the World Economic Forum. This is the Great Reset because this was always about the economy. It was always about resetting the economy. And that's a whole topic in of itself, but I had to bring it up because it's like, it's never about your welfare when it comes to the government. I hate to say it. I really wish it wasn't that way.
I know. And it makes me honestly sad because you wish that it wasn't the case. And I feel like that's part of the reason why people are so hesitant to agree with this type of thing or to even open themselves up to this type of information is because we don't want it to be true. Like our body is like super uncomfortable. Our mind is super uncomfortable with thinking that could potentially be, but we've seen it over and over again throughout our history of these, of the United States experimenting on its citizens with MK Ultra, with like all of these different things that have happened throughout our history. There's people that I know that are a lot of people that are waking up this year. There are people that have been in this since 2001 with the Twin Towers. I mean, there have just been a lot of different things throughout our history that have gradually woken us up. And I think this year has just been one of the biggest ones because of also social media, which has its benefits because we are in this information age as well.
That's true. And I'm so grateful for that, and it's always like how you use it, social media can be the greatest downfall or the greatest tool ever, just like anything. And I don't think that they foresaw that when they gave us this technology about how powerful it would be to get out the truth, because it's never come out in this way ever before. And, kind of like how I was saying, that rapid spread of information. And when you're comparing H1N1 to COVID, that's a downfall because they propagandize it so much more. But, and, I feel like I have to make this disclaimer. I'm not saying COVID-19 isn't real. Okay. I'm just saying it's being used as a tool against us, absolutely, without a doubt being used against us. And so we can come back with that and say, okay, well, we can use this tool, social media, Zoom, all of everything, technology, to question and get the truth out there, and at least to get you thinking about these things. Because I can't tell you how much it's benefited my life to understand the truth of what's going on, because it really changed the way I moved through the world, and it changed the depth of my relationships and the depth of my relationship with myself, and taught me to, that really is why I love, when I teach people their human design, is because without even telling them, this is a conspiracy or this is fake or, this is a false flag or whatever, I can teach them how to use their intuition, and then they figure it out for themselves. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's how I feel about with all of this, is that I don't want you to believe me. I want you to research it for yourself. Like
Exactly.
don't even take my word for it, because I'm constantly, learning new information as well.
Yeah.
And these are all things that, again, we don't really know about, but when like somebody plants that little seed, it's
Yes.
just it's just easy to run with it. If this is something that you are finding that you're awakening and you're like, I don't know what to look up, just pick a subject from history and dive deep into it. Because I think
Yeah.
awareness, like you said, is so, so powerful. Because when you think about, it's like the microcosm of the macrocosm,
Yeah.
because we can only be as aware of ourselves as we are aware of really what's going on around us. So
Yeah.
if you are completely blind and oblivious to, like the way that this world really is moving, and the I don't know how else to put it, but just the inner agendas and things like that, you can really, I think, dive deeper into yourself. It really is like
Yeah.
just this like small version of what's happening on a bigger scale. And so I think the more that I've dove deep into that awareness, the more I've also dove deep into my own self-awareness and my own personal growth.
Yeah, and really just making me realize how growing up, basically, I grew up an hour from Chicago, and it was like a small suburb, and then I moved to Chicago, and then I moved to Portland, and realizing how, like, unself-reliant I was because of that upbringing really woke me up because I was like, "Oh my gosh, like, I really am dependent on the government in many ways," and that's why they want people in the city and off the land and, not in nature because if you're self-sufficient and you know how to grow your own food and you're connected to nature, you're kind of unstoppable. You make your own money. Um, there's a reason why there's like a tax penalty for being self-employed.
Yeah, straight up.
Right? Even being an independent contractor where you like work, you contract with other people, it's something that I do. And it's insane, you know what I mean? And then it gives you a different perspective on how much like we're taxed and the government control there because it's like, money is energy. And so when you're getting that tax and that energy taken from you, it has a palpable effect. And it can cause you to have like kind of a self-limitation where you're like, well, why would I try harder? I'm just going to get taxed more. I'm just going to, get more taken from me by the government. And it's like, it doesn't matter like if you're left or right. It's just like we need to learn how to come together and be self-autonomous again. And, everybody has a different skill that they can contribute. And if you spend less time on social media, less time in fear, less time in the propaganda, you can figure out what you're uniquely good at, and then you can contribute in a meaningful way to society, and we can really up level the society again. So we're not so dependent on the government.
Yeah, definitely. And that just kind of reminds me of like where we're moving, I think in general tends to scare a lot of people, because it's like you're seeing a lot of like the fall of jobs like cashiers and some of
Yeah.
the like jobs where they can be replaced with technology. Like you said, this
Yeah.
reset where they're trying to move us into like a digital currency. They're
Yeah.
trying to move things into more of a technological age. And while that has some of its freaky Black Mirror parallels that sometimes I'd rather just push out of my mind,
Yeah.
I also see a lot of the benefit, because most people that are working those jobs are not passionate about that.
Yeah.
They honestly don't wake up in the morning excited to go and be a CVS checkout person.
Yeah.
These are jobs that are going to free us to be able to tap into things that we are actually passionate about, and to be able to again move into, like you said, like just like that different way of like moving in the world too. Like we have the internet now, which is this much more like feminine way of working, rather than this masculine kind of 9 to 5 structure that we have had.
Mhm.
And so through this we are able to do anything that we want, which is
Yeah.
really kind of a beautiful thing. And so even though it's dark, I always like to also throw in those little like pieces of light and like
Yeah.
positive perspectives and ways of viewing it too.
Yeah. And it's like, there's always a balance. There's always a yin and a yang, you know,
Mhm.
for how much darkness there is in the world, there's always that big potential for light. And speaking of light, I'm sorry for my lighting.
Oh, it's okay.
It's going
But
crazy this
yeah,
morning.
and that's
Um,
almost like the same parallel with, you know, awareness and shining lightness on those dark spaces. Because if we don't know something is there, if we don't acknowledge that there's like this darkness, how are we going to shine light on it?
exactly. Exactly. We have to know it's there in order to solve the problem. And, you know, I never want somebody to get down on themselves if they feel like they had no idea about this, or, you know, if they're in a job that they don't like, or if they feel like they weren't living who they wanted to be, because that is a lifelong journey and it's going to look different for everybody. And there is no like perfection. It's just about being aware of, you know, the forces that are kind of working against us and trying to keep us small, trying to make us unaware of our real power. And once you're aware of it, then you can work with it. And, you know, you don't have to be like, nobody's saying, oh, you have to be like a millionaire entrepreneur or something like that. You know, I think that you can go to the other side and then be so obsessed with like, that's what I see today anyway. I don't know if you agree, Callie, but you can get so lost in like, okay, I'm going to be this amazing entrepreneur. And then you get like lost in that world of productivity, productivity, productivity. Once you get out of like the 9 to 5, it's always about coming back to balance and realizing that there's always going to be a way to be successful and to be in alignment. Even if you don't know it exists yet, it will find you, and there's always going to be a way to do things in balance. But it's just about stripping away what's false, you know, what are the lies, so that you can get to the truth of who you are, the truth of what's going on in the outside world. And that really is going to be a lifelong journey, and I'm always learning, I'm always updating what I know. And um for those of you into human design, this is a perfect point to bring up, that if you have an open head center in ajna, you're never going to know 100% with certainty what the truth is. It's going to be like an 80%. And I think that that's so beautiful, to have people that are open-minded and willing to see every side of something and put the pieces of the puzzle together and take their ego out of it and be like, you know, I don't know if this is 100% true, but this is what I've found to be true in my life. And through my research, this is what I've found to be true. You should check it out and see if it resonates.
Yeah. And that's this entire conversation. That's why I think I love like our conversation so much, is because it's this open-ended question. It's forever this like almost like a flower blossoming and blooming. It just like keeps flowering and it just keeps going and keeps going. It's not something that is like I'm so rigid in my beliefs. Like I'm
Yeah.
so like closed off to that. And so I love that explanation of it through like human design and that too, which is
Yeah.
why I think I'm always constantly assessing and reassessing, you know, myself, and the way I'm thinking is because, you know, I've got all openness. So it took
Sure
me, that's
do.
so that's why like it when I tell people that like I am against vaccines and things like that, I tell them like I have been through it in my mind in so many different ways for
Yes.
years before I would ever allow myself to even come to that conclusion. So I did not take that decision lightly at all. That's something that I think we talked about in my human design like life purpose reading, was because
Mhm.
I am a person that is a natural skeptic. So
Mhm.
I am not somebody who just, you know, was like, oh, like I saw one anti-vax documentary and just jumped on board or
Yeah.
anything like that. It's very much a, you know, there's something that just starts that wheel rolling. And then it just becomes like all downhill and you kind of spiral from there when you really start diving into any of these topics.
And you know, for those of you unfamiliar with human design, there's different energy types, and Callie, being a reflector, is actually the perfect person to be having this kind of conversation, because, you know, since you have all your energy centers open, you're going to feel the energy of the planet so much stronger than the rest of us. For people who don't know, reflectors are 1% of the population. So very, very incredibly rare and so special. And you're here to kind of be a reflection, a mirror for where we're at as a society. And so, you stepping up and saying, hey, there's something wrong here that we need to assess. People need to listen to that because that's what you're here to tell us and warn us about.
Yeah, and I love that like explanation of it, because I do feel that the more that I have learned about my human design, and the more that I have like tapped into that and also started talking more about like vaccines, is that I do feel more of like the health of the energies of people that I'm around, and like the spaces that I'm around, and even like you said, like the energy of kind of the world. And so from that like assessment standpoint, you can just feel the energy of our healthcare, and just how it doesn't work for anyone, the patients, the workers,
Yes.
the entire energy of it. And so that's where it really started for me, that like dove me kind of deeper into this path, was because I felt that energy so heavily.
Yeah, and that's been kind of my lesson, is that I will intuitively know something right off the bat. And I think that is probably because of my open identity center, because I can just like absorb somebody's energy so easily. It's another center in human design. I know that people may not know what we're talking about. But I just automatically know if somebody is bullshitting, if somebody is telling the truth, if somebody is a good person, if a policy is for real, if something is for real in the media. I just know it, I feel it so strongly. And then I have to kind of backpedal and back up my intuition, because it's so easy for me to be like, oh, I just know, and then I leave it at that. Then I have to go back and like, okay, actually learn why my intuition was telling me that there was something off.
Yeah, that bullshit detector is strong.
I know, it's like the best superpower to have, though, is the BS detector. It's like, then you just know, and then you can't ignore it, and it's like, it's just, you see beyond the physical, you can tap into the energetic, and that will always tell you everything you need to know about something. And then, your mind can make up stories as to why you should trust it, even if you don't energetically trust something. And hindsight, you can look back, you were always right. If there's something off, there's something off, and you'll probably find out about it later.
I was just thinking that exact thing, where you meet people and you have this weird feeling about them. You have an intuition that tells you that you don't really like that person, and then you question yourself out of it. You second guess yourself, and then months, maybe years go by, and you're like, wow, I was right about that person from the very beginning.
Yeah, and that's how I always was with like conventional medical doctors. They always seemed off to me, and I didn't know why. Like their suggestions always felt off. And then like looking back, I was like, well, no wonder, it's because they are off.
Yes, exactly.
And that's no shade to like every conventional medicine doctor. There are so many people who are such genuine people who are really here to help. And it's just that we have to look at we have to zoom out sometimes and see the bigger picture, that a lot of the things, even if there's very well-intentioned and well-meaning people involved, that the very structure of that thing is faulty and is based on money and false research and false premises. And unfortunately, a lot of the systems that should be out to protect us are corrupted. So it's just always zooming out and seeing that, because, I think it's almost as like a warning. Like if I had to guess, I think a lot of these systems are going to be falling fast. And so I'd rather people be prepared for that and have an understanding of that than be like totally taken by surprise when these systems kind of unravel.
Yeah, I agree fully. You're seeing how quickly that can happen in a
Yeah.
very short period of time.
Yeah.
And I think that that's part of the reason why, as a reflector, I've always been somebody that has said I'm kind of an anti-systems person, not like
Yeah.
the positive systems, but just in general, the systems that we have, in my mind, I can just see better. I can just feel that it can be better. And I think that all of us can agree upon that it can always improve. You know, one of the worst things that we can possibly say is that this is the way that things have always been done. And so,
Yeah.
like you said, I don't think it's ever about an individual person, never taking a stab at like certain, like at doctors or anything like that, but just looking at the overall medical system and then listening to what really resonates with you. Because for me, one of the things that really clicked was I, was looking into natural health and I'm like, you know what? I have never really been asked about my diet or if I've been exercising or any of these questions that to me mean health.
Mm-hmm.
And so when that started firing off and like clicking for me, I was like, well, I understand that this is necessary, but this isn't the preventative health that I'm looking for when it comes to my everyday mental health and needs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that we already are seeing so many positive shifts. I mean, maybe we can end on a positive note on the shifts that are already taking place because, I don't think 5 years ago, I'm a nutritional therapy practitioner, and um, I don't think people would have even understood any of what that was or would have even been seeking out not somebody who's a registered dietitian. Like people are so open now to alternative medicine, more so than they have been in a really long time. And that's where you see that the darkness can become the light because we live in such a sick world at the moment where so many people have chronic illness, so many people just wake up and they don't feel good every single day. That shadow, that darkness pushed them to seek alternatives. And that's why we see a rise in alternative medicine again. It was out of something that's uncomfortable and unfortunate. And my heart goes out. I've experienced it myself. But it pushes you to question and to seek things outside of the conventional paradigm. And I think that we're just going to keep seeing more and more of that, more people questioning, more people looking to alternatives. And we're really going to see a resurgence of all of this amazing, what our ancestors always knew about how to take care of the human body and why we're supposed to be connected to nature, how to care for our world, and how to care for nature in a real way, not a way that, is proposed by the government.
Exactly. And listening to our own bodies, because I think that's for me, like again, where we can end on to is that it is always what resonates with you. When something to me is mandated or something to me is pushed, that just means that they're telling you not to they're telling you to question yourself. They're telling you to question your own
Yeah.
intuition. And so I think that when we tap back into that, we will see in general our physical health improve, our mental health improve, our spiritual health improve, because we're kind of taught to not question in the science or not question, what we're told. And so that's what the goal of all of this is just to begin to question things and to
Yeah.
make your own conclusions.
Yeah, absolutely. Question what you're being told, but don't question yourself.
Exactly. Like question maybe the way that you think, or maybe like your thoughts, but never question your own intuition. I think that
Yeah.
there's a wrong difference in that we're really not taught. Like we
Yeah.
listen to, our own thoughts, but a lot of times those come from social and, societal conditioning from
Mhm.
outside sources. So when we start to question those outside sources, I think that's when we start to question, like the way that we think about things and actually
Yeah.
start to tune more into our own gut feeling with what resonates. But a lot of times we just only hear one side of things versus hearing multiple sides, which is why I've felt the need to start like speaking my voice more and allowing people to hear a different side of things so that
Yeah.
again you can see it from multiple perspectives and create your own conclusion with it.
Yeah, and I just want to, thank everybody who has made it through this episode because I know that these aren't, easy things to talk about. They're not easy things to study. It really kind of shakes you in a way, and I want to acknowledge that. And I just really appreciate anybody who takes the time to explore and to question and to see things in a different way than maybe they aren't used to. And so thank you so much for having me on again. And thank you for doing this, Callie. It's always such a pleasure. And I just love these conversations so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too. I'm so glad that Zoom and technology allowed us to record
Yeah,
time, because really the universe was testing us on this
that's
conversation.
true.
And it didn't work a couple of times before this. So again, thank you if you did make it this far. Your light and your presence here is so appreciated. And I am very grateful for you, Cailee. Thank you for this conversation.
And look out for a Telegram because
Yes.
we'll have
Oh,
links to all this stuff.
speaking of, yes, we are starting up a Telegram, because it is an uncensored, as of right now, platform for anybody to get basically a message thread of any kind of things that we come across, things that might interest you that are along these subject lines. So be sure to stay tuned for that, and we'll keep you posted. So thank you again.
Bye.